The sun, a relentless brass-colored forge in the New Mexico sky, beat down on the parched earth, demanding silence and submission. Elias Thorne, a man whose spirit had been tempered hard by the desert's unforgiving nature, rode with the stoic weariness of someone who had seen too much and expected little good. His life was etched into the deep lines around his eyes and the slow, steady rhythm of his dappled gray mare, Whisper. The dust he kicked up was fine as flour, the color of dried blood, billowing gently as he pursued a lost steer near the desolate edges of his claim. He had been chasing the faint, frustrating scribble of its trail for half a day, the promise of easy work gone sour in the cracked, thirsty soil. The silence out here was more than just the absence of noise. It was a vast, heavy, almost sacred thing, broken only by the faint creak of worn leather, the lonely whine of the wind through the scrub, and the sharp predatory cry of a distant hawk circling an unseen meal. Elias liked it this way, alone, quiet, and tragically predictable. The high desert was honest. It never promised comfort, only stark reality. He was a man running from a decision he hadn't made and a tragedy he hadn't stopped, and the silence was his penance. But then, that sacred silence was brutally fractured. He heard it, so faint it might have been a trick of the wind, a sound like a breath that had forgotten how to draw in. He froze in the saddle, a man carved from granite, every nerve ending tuned to the landscape, his heart stilled, awaiting the echo. It came again, a whimper, weak and sharp, like a single thread about to snap. It was unmistakably human. Elias dismounted swiftly, his movements economical and practiced, tying Whisper's reins to a dead, sun-bleached limb. His heavy-caliber rifle was a familiar, comforting weight across his back. He moved through the scraggly junipers and the jagged, red-hued boulders until he came upon a small clearing. It was a mournful amphitheater, ringed by ancient, stoic cottonwoods, their silvery leaves fluttering like desperate lost coins, a place that felt like a forgotten altar. And there, beneath the oldest, most gnarled tree, he saw her. She was hanging by the wrists, her arms stretched tragically high above her head, her body limp and angled, like a broken doll tossed aside. Her feet barely scraped the unforgiving dirt, offering no purchase. Her skin was the color of sun-darkened earth, and her long, thick black hair was matted with dust, sweat, and a sickening crimson tinge. Her chest rose in shallow, erratic spasms, but by some grim, fierce will, she was alive. Elias's eyes snapped to the crude wooden sign, nailed brutally to the tree trunk above her head. The words were scrawled in aggressive, angular red paint, a desperate, ugly manifesto. "White man, don't forgive." He stepped back, a physical recoil, bile rising in his throat. The air transformed the quiet clearing into a place of warning, message, and curse. The words echoed a chilling truth he carried deep inside. The frontier was a place of endless, generational grievance, and his own kind rarely let go of a perceived injury. He quickly scanned the ridges and rocks, no movement, no sound, just the wind brushing through the dead leaves like hushed, malevolent whispers. His hand instinctively went to the cool steel of the knife on his belt. "God's teeth," he muttered, his voice a gravelly rasp. "What the hell did they do to you? And who in heaven's name leaves a message like that?" The memory of his burning barn and the silence that followed the screams was suddenly vivid, cold against the desert heat. The girl stirred, a barely perceptible flinch. Her head lolled forward, and he saw the raw, angry burn marks where the coarse rope had cut deep into her wrists, strips of flesh weeping blood and serum. He swallowed hard, forcing his fear down. "You hear me, girl?" he asked, his voice strained. No response. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said, softer now, a desperate reassurance he needed as much as she did. His boots crunched forward. He could see her face, young, heartbreakingly young, with a strong jawline, her cheeks hollowed from thirst. The rope was twisted mesquite fiber, tough as wire. Whoever tied it meant for her to suffer slowly, painfully, watching the sun traverse the sky one last time. He pulled out his knife, its steel dull in the light. His fingers trembled slightly. That sign, it screamed accusations. It conjured echoes of the violence his people had inflicted, making him feel profoundly, historically guilty. It made him hesitate, weighing the price of intervention against the certainty of her death. But she groaned again, a sound that was pure, uncomplicated pain, a sound too close to his sister's final cries, which he hadn't answered, and that sound undid him. "The hell with all of them, the vengeful bastards," he whispered, his blade finding the taut, resistant rope. "I ain't that man, not anymore." With one firm, decisive slice, the rope surrendered. She fell forward, a dead weight, and Elias caught her just in time, staggering with the sudden shift of momentum. Her body was feverish, burning, and alarmingly light, a painful reminder of how long she must have been hanging there. Her eyes fluttered open, dark, terrified, unfocused, staring right through him. Elias eased her down, his own breath ragged, the effort demanding every ounce of his strength. He poured precious water onto a clean cloth to dab her cracked lips. "Easy now," he said, his voice low and comforting. "You're safe, at least for the moment. You're safe." She blinked, then her small, scraped hand instinctively clutched his sleeve, a desperate anchor in a cruel world. He looked at the sign one last time, committing the hateful script to memory, then back at her. He pulled off his heavy coat, a worn piece of wool that smelled of sage and sweat, and draped it, gently over her shoulders. "You got a name?" he asked. No answer. "Nothing, huh? Guess we'll find one for you then." He stood, lifting her with a supreme effort, cradling her like something fragile but not yet broken. "For now, you're with me, and we ride hard." And with that, Elias Thorne stepped back into the savage wilderness, carrying a girl marked for death, and a secret heavy enough to hang any man, knowing he had just signed his own death warrant by rejecting the frontier's cruel code. If this initial act of defiance against injustice resonated with you, imagine the strength it takes to keep fighting. Follow The Desert Bloom. Chronicles for more stories of impossible hope in a land that always demands a price. The sun was sinking, bleeding orange and purple over the peaks by the time Elias reached his ranch, the Double Cross, a modest outpost clinging to the edge of a desert too stubborn to forget its past violence. A single rickety windmill creaked mournfully on the fence line, singing a lonely tune. The old barn sagged like an aging beast. The house was one room and a loft, its roof patched with old sheet metal, but it stood solid and honest, a bulwark against the elements. Elias eased the girl from the saddle, his arms already protesting the dead weight, and carried her inside. She was fevered, her head pressed to his chest, her breaths whispering like dry leaves skittering across a stone floor. He laid her gently on the cot. Her eyes fluttered open, dark and wide, fixed on him with a depth that held both suspicion and exhaustion. The lantern flickered, chasing the shadows as he poured water into a metal basin. He knelt. Her legs were severely bruised, one ankle swollen to twice its size. The rope burns on her wrists were deeply scored, angry red and purple, like hideous brands. "I ain't gonna hurt you," he rumbled, more to break the oppressive silence than to expect a reply. "Just cleaning up a bit." He dipped the cloth into the warm water, wringing it out. Slowly, reverently, he took her right foot and placed it in the basin. She flinched, a bare tremor that ran through her whole frame, but did not pull away. He began to wash the dust and crusted blood from her skin, his movements gentle, precise, like he was a sculptor handling brittle clay. The water quickly turned red and brown, with the desert's filth and the visible evidence of her suffering. He worked in silence, a mantle of concentration wrapped around him, feeling her gaze fixed on him. Her lips parted once, as if struggling to shape a forgotten syllable, but no sound emerged. "Reckon you don't talk much?" he muttered, trying to sound casual. "That's all right. Silence is better than most things, most days." When he was done, he wrapped her feet in soft cloth strips. "You remind me of a river I used to camp near," he said quietly, gazing into the distance beyond the walls. It was dry most of the year, looked dead, a scar, in the landscape, but after the rains, it ran fast and deep, surprising everyone. They called it Quiet Snake. Don't know why, just quiet until it wasn't. He looked at her again, studying her features, cheekbones sharp as ridgelines, something ancient behind her eyes that held the weight of generations. "I'll call you Alara," he said softly, testing the sound. "Just for now. It means bright and strong. You look like an Alara, quiet but strong." She blinked once, slowly. No protest, no nod, just breath. He covered her with a heavy blanket, then grabbed his bedroll and took to the barn. He gave her the cot, telling himself it was for her health and modesty. But the truth was he feared what her presence meant, a moral obligation he hadn't sought but couldn't shed. That sign still burned in his mind, branding his own home. The days that followed were a delicate dance of wary cohabitation. Elara, as he called her, ate little, but what she did consume, she took with the fierce focus of one who understood survival. She moved with acute caution, her eyes always darting, always alert. Elias found himself constantly checking the horizon, his nerves frayed thin. The silence was thick with unspoken history. On the 5th day, a new threat emerged, unconnected to the cavalry. A band of rustlers, bold enough to ride too close to his fence line, spooked his few remaining head of cattle. Elias watched them from the barn loft, 3 men, 2 casually armed. He knew he couldn't leave Elara, and confronting them openly was a risk he wouldn't take with his rifle being their only defense. Elara had been sweeping the dirt floor, her movements fluid and quiet. She appeared silently beside him in the loft. She pointed to a length of old wire tucked in the rafters, then made a low clicking sound with her tongue and mimed setting a small snare near the cattle pens. It was a strategy born of deep, indigenous knowledge, a quiet trap, not for killing, but for disabling a horse. Elias hesitated, but the pragmatism in her dark eyes convinced him. Together, they worked in the fading light, moving with synchronized stealth, laying a tripwire just where the horses would be tied if the rustlers returned in the dark. They did return. Around midnight, Elias heard the faint sound of horses approaching. He gripped his rifle. Then came a sharp, unexpected whicker of a horse falling, followed by a shouted curse. The rustlers, 2 now on foot, panicked, grabbing their tethered animals and riding off into the dark, having lost their 3rd man's mount. The next morning, the abandoned horse stood bewildered near the broken wire. Elara, watching from the window, gave the smallest nod of recognition. It was a shared victory, a bond forged not through words, but through shared, vital effort. Trust cracked the silence. 3 mornings later, Elias saw the boot print, smaller than his, newer, angled deliberately toward the barn. Cavalry issue, fresh. No more than a few hours old. He rose slowly, eyes scanning the ridgeline. The silence was officially broken. Back inside, Elara sat by the window, body tense. "You seen anyone?" he asked. Silence. "I think we've got company, and they know where to look," Elias murmured, his hand resting on the rifle. The shadow was finally catching up. The rider arrived midday. Dust curled behind the chestnut horse. The man wore the blue and gold of the U.S. cavalry, his expression grim and tight. "You Elias Thorne?" the man demanded. "Lieutenant Caleb Graves, Fort Redemption. I'm back. The reward was doubled, Thorne. They believe she's here, and I don't like being lied to." Graves handed down the notice. The crude sketch of the Indigenous girl was now heavily marked, the word dangerous underlined in thick ink. Wanted for murder and escape, reward $1,000. Elias felt the paper's crispness grating in his hand, a tangible weight of the law's judgment. "Can't say I have," he replied, looking up slowly, his eyes steel. "I saw your ranch brand near the flats. We think she was rescued near there." Graves pressed, his gaze cutting into Elias like a scalpel. Elias handed the paper back, his movements deliberate. "Ain't seen nobody but jackrabbits and a cow that don't listen, Lieutenant. Maybe you should try talking to the rustlers who left a horse near my barn a few nights ago. Seems they're closer to crime than I am." Graves narrowed his eyes, clearly thrown by the unexpected mention of the rustlers. "She's part of a violent group, Thorne. That sign they left, they mean it. You harbor her, you're just as guilty." Elias's jaw tightened. "If I see anything, I'll send word. Now, get off my property." Graves stared, holding the tension for a long, uncomfortable moment, then snapped his reins. "We'll be back, Thorne, with a patrol." Inside, Elara stood just beyond the curtain. She had heard every word. Elias stepped in. "They came looking. The reward went up. I told them no." Her eyes narrowed, still suspicious, still guarded. "I don't know what you did, Elara, but I know what they did to you, and what they're trying to do to me. Out here, a man makes choices. I made mine." He turned to the stove, pretending to stir the beans. Behind him, she shifted, a small, audible breath. Trust cracked the silence a little wider, cemented by the shared lie and the shared danger. If Elias's loyalty inspires you, double down on your convictions. Click here to share this story and inspire someone else to choose decency over fear, even when the price is $1,000 and a military warrant. Later, Elias sat on the porch sharpening his knife, the metal humming a low, lethal sound. The faint crunch of footsteps on gravel reached his ears, lighter, human. He looked up. Elara was outside. It was the first time she had crossed the threshold alone since the rustler incident, a sure sign that the time for silence was over. She walked slowly toward the barn, the blanket trailing. She knelt in the bare dirt and picked up a stick. Elias walked over, giving her space, knowing this was her moment to speak. He stood behind her, watching her hand trace complex, bold lines into the earth. She had drawn a bird, its wings stretched wide in frantic flight, but flames encircled it like a burning crown. The image was sharp, etched with tension, alive and in profound agony, fighting to ascend despite the inferno. Elias squatted beside her, his presence a silent invitation. "What's that?" Elara did not look up. "Bird and fire," she said, her voice dry and cracked, yet resonant. "My people's sign. We called ourselves the Ashborn. This was my father's symbol, our family, always flying, always fire, to cleanse and to rise." She tapped the center of the bird with the stick. "My father was a minor chief of the Pima. Our band was small, peaceful. We knew the land. We traded. We learned the settlers' god, their tongue. We wanted to live." Her fingers tightened around the stick. "A full winter ago, a white woman was found dead near our hunting ground, throat cut. Her husband, a prospector from the mining camp, killed her. Everyone knew the truth, whispered it, but they blamed us. They needed a scapegoat, a savage face for their own sin. They said justice. The soldiers came, but so did the ranchers, town men with rifles and fear in their eyes. They didn't want justice. They wanted the land, and they wanted us gone. The memory was a gaping wound. They burned our camp, shot my brothers while they slept. One was only 12. My mother, she died holding the prayer beads the priest gave her, praying for them. The murderers." Ayana paused, the stick trembling. "They didn't just kill the men. They burned the old ones, the women, the children, inside the tents." Elias clenched his fists, the rage a cold, hard knot in his chest. "They left my father hanging from our council pole, a warning, an execution. I run, hide. They found me in a hollow tree. I had a small knife, but they took it, said I was planning revenge, said I was dangerous because I understood English. They tied me, questioned me, beat me for days, trying to get me to name others. Then they took me to that tree you found me on, hung me up like bait for anyone still alive, to draw them out, to send a final message." She turned, locking eyes with him. There was cold fury and deep sorrow. "I did not steal. I did not kill. I did nothing wrong but survive their hatred." Elias held her gaze. "I believe you." She turned back, dropped the stick, and then the sobs came, raw and unfiltered. He stayed beside her, unmoving, reaching out and pressing his hand into the dirt beside the flaming bird, a silent testimony, a vow. Her breathing slowed. She lifted her head, face streaked with dirt and tears. "You can call me Ayana," she whispered, giving him the name of her soul. "It means peaceful river." Elias nodded. "Ayana it is, Ayana Thorne. We will find a better name for you one day." That night, the wind whistled low, and the silence between them was shared breath, a language spoken without sound. Ayana stood by the window. She turned. "Why did you cut me down, Elias? Why risk everything for a savage, as they call me?" He looked at her, firelight reflecting in his eyes. "Because once," he said, his voice flat, broken, "I couldn't save her." "Your family?" "Last spring, raiders hit our ranch. Apache, they said. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. It was the chaos of the frontier. I was out hunting, came back too late, came back to ashes." He took a ragged breath, the confession catching in his throat, smelling the ghosts of smoke and terror. "My sister, Serafina, she was 16. I heard her crying in the barn. I could hear the sounds, the terror, the desperation. I was 20 feet away, behind the water trough. I was scared. I didn't go in. I waited for help. She died before anyone came. I heard her last breath. I heard the silence that followed. And I've lived with that silence ever since. The memory of his cowardice was the brand he carried, the unforgiveness directed at himself. The silence was heavy, weighted with shared failure, a mutual recognition of the frontier's brutality. "You saved me because you couldn't save her," Ayana whispered, her voice gentle, recognizing the depth of his shame. He nodded. She studied him, her eyes wise beyond her years. "If I had been white, a settler's daughter, would you still have pulled the knife?" He walked to her, cupped her chin gently. "I don't love skin, Ayana. I love what breathes under it. I love what is brave under the fire, and I owe the courage I didn't have then to you now." Her eyes welled. She pressed her cheek into his calloused palm. They leaned in. The kiss was quiet, then fuller, as if both had finally remembered how to exhale the fear and inhale the possibility of future. Her hands trembled on his chest. His arms circled her back. Inside, something began to mend. The next morning, the wind returned, carrying the scent of distant, undeniable smoke. They were out of time. Elias sat by the barn fire pit, staring at the hateful sign he had retrieved. "White man, don't forgive." He laid it among the kindling and struck a match. The flames rose slowly, swallowing the words in orange and gold. The hate itself resisted dying, spitting ash and sparks. Ayana stood beside him, watching the fire. "I should have burned it sooner, Elias. Let the desert reclaim the hatred." She moved closer, shoulder to shoulder. "Thank you," she said softly. The next day they packed. 2 horses saddled, the ranch a memory. They took only what was essential: water, jerky, 2 rifles, and the leather-bound book Elias had carried since childhood, a book of old poetry. "We have to go tonight," Elias told her. "South, past the border, into the Sierra Madres. We can make it if we ride hard, stay off the trails, and pray for luck." Ayana stepped close. She held his hand, intertwining their fingers. "I want to live. I want to live as your wife, where the birds are free." He closed his eyes, accepting the promise, letting it be his new anchor. They rode through the desert under cover of stars, sticking to the arroyos and rocky ridges, covering their tracks where possible. For 3 days and nights, they pushed the horses, rationing water, catching sleep in desperate bursts, leaning against each other for warmth and reassurance. The tension was a physical ache that never left. Elias saw the signs: disturbed pebbles, a freshly broken branch, and a distant repeated whistle that wasn't the wind. A hunter's call. They were being tracked, and the hunters were closer than he thought. 10 miles from the border, the land opened into low scrub brush and jagged stone cliffs. Elias scanned the horizon. His gut turned tight, colder than the dawn air. He had a bad feeling about the pass ahead. Then the shot came. The crack echoed across the plain, startling whisper. Elias jerked in the saddle, a crushing hammer blow to his side, and collapsed, sliding hard into the dirt. "Elias!" Ayana screamed, leaping from her horse, dropping her rifle but instantly scrambling for his. He clutched his side, blood instantly soaking his shirt. "Keep going! Don't stop for me!" he rasped, his breath catching. "No!" Another shot whizzed past them, striking the rock behind Ayana, kicking up dust and stone fragments. From the ridgeline, 2 figures appeared, riders, rifles raised. Elias groaned, pulling himself up, the pain blinding, but his eyes were on Ayana. "We have to move, now!" Ayana hooked her arm under his shoulder, trying desperately to lift his heavy frame. "I won't leave you, not after everything," she choked. She shoved his spare rifle into his hands. Through sheer bloody will, they stumbled toward a narrow gap between 2 cliffs, a hidden, choked pass known only to the deepest trackers. Elias's boots dragged. Every breath came wet and shallow, tasting of blood and copper. He forced himself forward, one agonizing step after another. They reached the gap. Ayana half dragged, half carried him inside, pressing him to the stone wall, her own breath ragged. She reached for the rifle, peering back. The riders had stopped. The shots faded. They knew better than to follow them into the rocks, where an injured man could still set an effective ambush. In the shadow of the pass, Elias collapsed to his knees, blood dripping onto the dust. He looked up at her, pain and wonder mixed in his eyes. "You said you wanted to be my wife. Looks like you'll have to haul the worthless goods." She knelt beside him, cupped his face, ignoring the blood and the dirt, her hands surprisingly strong. "I meant it, Elias. We are bound now, by blood and choice. Then we better make it through this pass. We can't let them have the last word." Ayana nodded, and her eyes, once terrified, were now fierce. She prayed silently, not to the Christian God, but to the spirits of fire, wind, and survival, begging them to shield the one man who had chosen to be her shield. Love here was always a gamble, and tonight they bet everything on a shared, desperate future. The path through the rocks was tortuous, narrow, and often required vertical climbs that made Elias scream internally. Ayana did not break. She used his heavy leather belt to cinch the wound, tying it brutally tight to stem the flow. She held him when he swayed, whispered strength when his will flagged, urging him on in a low, constant murmur. They moved for hours, until the trail opened into a dense grove of pinon pines, the scent of resin filling the air, a subtle sign of the approaching borderlands. The riders were gone. They found a riverbed, running low, hidden by willows. Elias collapsed, his body finally shutting down. For 3 days, Ayana tended him with fierce dedication. She tore strips of his shirt for bandages, boiling water from the river to sterilize the makeshift tools, mixing a bitter poultice from wild herbs she recognized from her childhood teachings, a mixture of juniper berries and ground bark, to fight infection. His fever spiked, and he descended into a terrifying delirium, reliving the day Serafina died, screaming his own name in shame and his sister's in agony. "Serafina, I'm coming! I should have gone in." Ayana held him, talking to him in her native tongue, a language of comfort and history, weaving a protection around him, forcing water and bitter tea down his throat. It was the only way to save him, to let him face the moment he had run from while she held him tethered to the living world. The 4th morning, the fever had broken. Elias woke, his eyes clear, the memory of the delirium receding, but leaving the truth raw and exposed. He saw her sleeping beside him, exhausted but alive, her face smudged with dirt and the residue of the herbs. "Ayana," he whispered. She stirred instantly, her hand snapping to his forehead to check his temperature. "Elias, you are here." They held each other, the weight of the frontier, the scent of pine, and the damp earth all merging into one powerful, undeniable sense of survival. They had chosen each other over hate, over fear, and over death. They had made it to the other side of the fire. You've followed their epic journey through danger and defiance, but their story of building a new life is just beginning. To read the exclusive extended resolution detailing their peace and the birth of their child, click here to subscribe to the Wild West Legacy series. Your commitment supports more stories of love that defies the frontier. Months passed on the southern edge of the territory, where the border blurred into mesquite groves and the high desert, gave way to the rugged, protective slopes of the mountains. This was the land of Ayana's ancestors, a hidden network of ancient paths and sacred springs. A small lodge stood near the river's bend, built of smooth river pine and hides, strong but humble. It was not a settler's cabin, nor was it a traditional lodge. It was a blend of both, a structure of 2 cultures finally meeting without violence. It sat surrounded by whispering reeds and wildflowers Ayana had transplanted from high mountain meadows. In the shade of its awning, Ayana Thorne, the newly added name felt right, felt earned, sat cross-legged on a woven rush mat. She was meticulously stitching a tiny white shirt, using the tough cotton Elias had packed. Her belly had rounded gently, a quiet testament to their survival, visible now beneath her woven sash. Humming quietly, a low, melodic tune that spoke of rivers and sun, she worked the needle, her fingers sure and calm. Beyond a small, thriving garden of squash and beans, Elias trained a young Mustang he had traded for, murmuring low commands in a mix of English and the few Pima words Ayana had taught him. He worked shirtless, his wound a pale, jagged scar on his side, a permanent reminder of the price of his choice. He was no longer the restless, haunted rancher. He was a builder, a farmer, a protector. Every so often he glanced back toward the lodge, catching sight of her silhouette through the light curtain, and every time he smiled, a genuine, deep-seated smile that had been a stranger to his face for years. The walls of their home bore no trophies, no portraits, just bundles of drying herbs Ayana had gathered, 2 well-worn books, Elias's poetry and a battered Spanish dictionary, and a child's blanket waiting to be finished. Ayana moved through it like the breath of the place itself, present, grounding, full of quiet life, tending to the sacred fires and the small, enduring spring that fed their garden. One evening, after the arduous work of building had settled into the quiet routine of keeping, she walked down to the river, the same path she'd taken for months. The current moved slow and certain, reflecting the colors of the twilight sky. She stepped barefoot into the shallows, let the cool water kiss her skin, and laid both hands over her belly. "Little one," she whispered, her voice a soft benediction that carried a lifetime of hope. "Your father. He didn't just forgive the world, he forgave himself. He loved, and he kept his promise to everyone, to me, and to the little sister he left behind. His debt is paid. We are free." Elias came to stand beside her, his long shadow merging with hers on the water, their fingers entwined without a word. Together, they watched the river drift under the dusk, where the first stars began to blink into view, cold and distant, yet beautiful. They had created a quiet patch of earth where love had taken root, defying the violent codes of the frontier. The river, peaceful river, kept flowing, slow, steady, and certain, like her name, like their life, like something finally, truly home, built on the ashes of unforgiveness.